And we are back. New York City is grappling with an affordable housing crisis. And in the Bronx, the struggle is particularly acute. Despite historically lower median rents, the borough remains one of the most rent-burdened areas in the city, where many residents spend more than 30% of their income on housing, well above the recommended threshold. Now, while the progress is being made, the scale of the housing crisis in the city as a whole, well, significant, requiring continued efforts and innovative solutions to address the needs of all residents. I'm pleased to be joined now by the Chief Program Officer at Housing Solutions of New York, Dr. Xellex Rivera. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure's mine.
Listen, when we talk about this here, obviously, a lot of people were excited about I want to say the increase that New York City was having in terms of like the life, the vitality, but yet and still in the process of that, a lot of people forced out of their homes, and homelessness is real.
Correct. There was a huge spike in homelessness, not just in regards to the migrant crisis, but also native New Yorkers that are constantly faced with rent burdens or affordability to stay in their housing. And so a lot of our resources throughout the city, not just at Housing Solutions, but at other locations, is trying to get people back into permanent housing, right? All of the stipends and availability or options that we had in the city have now been lifted, and so now it's a process of how do we return them back to permanent housing, independent living, so that we can see more New Yorkers be successful.
So what has the impact been right here on Bronx residents when you talk about, and New York City residents, I should say, when it comes to this here?
So the Bronx is an area actually that is actually more affordable in comparison to other boroughs, right? So you'll see a lot of new developments coming about in the Bronx, which I wanted to bring light to because it's so important for us to highlight the fact that there are a lot of elected officials here. There are a lot of Bronx providers similar to Housing Solutions that are trying to build up new developments, new affordable housing options for persons. However, when you look at the city as a whole, a lot of people are facing this crisis. To pay more than 30, 40, 50, sometimes 60% of your income is a bit egregious, right? So think about it. If you look at your check right now, could you pay 50% of your take-home check just on rent? And that has nothing to do with your utilities, your transportation, anything along those lines. So trying to break some of these cycles so that more Bronxites as well as New Yorkers are able to sustain is the goal.
How do you break the cycle, given the fact that it continues to get progressively worse? You've got these increasing rents, you've got the lack of affordable housing, and you've got people out here who say, listen, I'm trying to struggle. And the new homeless person is not the same as the old homeless person, where you are the working homeless these days.
Absolutely. So it's a big increase with employed homeless individuals, which is very ironic. Actually, LA was the first area to have that increase, but we have it now too. So when we look at it, the best option is to find permanent supportive housing for persons. New York City is a hard city. Period. There's no way around it, right? That's why only the tough survive, they say. But how do we find resources? And so similar to Housing Solutions, finding a permanent supportive housing, giving them the options that they need. The benefit of permanent supportive housing is that you're in independent living. You pay your rent, 30% of whatever your income is. The city is still also helping you in the process. However, you also have support systems. You have case managers and social workers still in the building that you can use in case of emergency. Just imagine when you first went into your first apartment, if you had somebody that just was helping you on the side, it'll allow you to get some stability. So that's the goal of it. So that's how we aim for it.
What are we seeing with regards to racial disparities?
Oh, man. That's a tough one. There are a lot of laws in this city around discrimination or apartment discrimination, landlord discrimination, race discrimination. However, it's still a real thing, right? And ways around it is we particularly try to work on ensuring that our clients are just prepared and they present their best selves. That's the only way to get around it, right? Whatever your bias is as a person, we really can't control that. But what I can control is that when a client goes out and they're interviewing for this apartment, that they're presenting their very best self. They don't need to be connected to a stereotype that allows them to be boxed in and stay being unhoused. The goal is always to get them housing. So how do I do that? I make sure that they have appropriate clothing. I make sure that they're presenting well. I make sure that they're able to articulate themselves on the interview so that way they can't get discriminated against, right? And that's the only way around it. But everybody outside has their own biases.
As you look right now, obviously things from your perspective, worse, better?
Ironically, I think it's getting better, right? We were in a major crisis, a humanitarian crisis around 2022, 2023. As many people know, with the bus loads coming in, the buses have slowed down a bit. And so that allows us a little bit more time. The city is very responsive as it relates to vouchers, opportunities, finding of resources. The shelter system as a whole is also more comprehensive, particularly at Housing Solutions. We try to overcome as many barriers as we can, hopefully all of them, right, before putting a person back into housing, because it's not just about putting you in a house. Right? If you're addicted to drugs, me putting you back in a house would not necessarily sustain you. It might put you right back into shelter. But at Housing Solutions, we want to try to ensure that when we put you in a house, you can sustain and have longevity, right? Because in my opinion, you cannot eradicate homelessness 100%. There are natural disasters. You can't stop Mother Nature from doing whatever she does at the time she wants to do it.
Right.
And so when you look at stuff, or just freak of nature, right? If an electrical fire just happens, or bad wiring. So those kind of things are always going to happen. So there always will be a small spat of homelessness regardless. However, what we can do is try to make our city a little bit more affordable for the middle class and for the lower middle class, so that they can be able to sustain in some level of housing. That's safe. Yeah. That's also the key part.
Save is big.
Yeah,
save is
it's
big.
huge.
And when we talk about transitional housing, how many people are we finding really going that route of really needing transitional housing?
A lot, right? A lot of people do need transitional housing. When they end up finding or battling being unhoused, right? I always tell people, by the time you see them in shelter, or you read these shelter numbers, a person has exhausted all other options.
Right.
They've tried couch surfing, they've tried staying with their boyfriend, girlfriend, mother, father, whatever it is, right? But as you know, a lot of our apartments also aren't that big in New York City, so I can't house you for but so long. And so by the time they get to transitional housing, a lot of them are trying to use it as a mechanism to return back to independent living. Right? But there are some systemic breakdowns or bureaucracies that can kind of keep them handicapped into the system. And therefore, a lot of providers are trying to work to break those systemic issues, right? The goal is I should be out of a job at the end of the day, right? I should be trying to find a way for you to be in sustainable housing. But how do I do that? I got to break all of those barriers. And so working both with the system, but also with the client to ensure that they can get out is the goal.
I know you're out and about, so your conversations with the electeds and others with regards to this issue, how are you finding those going?
Actually, it's really good. In the Bronx, a lot of our elected officials, they're really advocating for affordable housing. The Bronx has heavy saturation. Actually, it's like the Bronx and Brooklyn that have heavy saturation of both transitional housing, shelter, or any type of services. But the Bronx in particular, we have a lot of them, right? And we kind of seem to be the gold mine for new ones. And a lot of people are like, I don't really like that, right? It's bringing down our neighborhoods to some people. That's how some people look at it. But it all goes back into how providers offer services. The provider, it is our job to ensure that our clients are not loitering. It's our job to ensure that they're not, panhandling and things of that nature. So a lot of times with us, Housing Solutions tries to work with the elected to ensure that at least the programs that I have in the area are not doing those things, because I don't want to be an eyesore. Right. But at the end of the day, people do need services. And so how do we meet in the middle? But a lot of elected officials are champions around affordable housing, or trying to sustain affordable housing in the borough in particular.
So let's talk about solutions, right?
Okay. What
are some potential solutions that you see from your perspective that can really advance the ball and really, close the gap here?
The biggest one is a lot of people don't know. And it's very ironic to say that, right? I always say to my students, because I teach a homeless class, or even to my staff, I say to them, God forbid you ended up homeless tomorrow. Do you know where to go? And most of them don't, right? Most working adults don't know who to call in case of this, right? We'll just all call 911 or 311, and that's as far as we'll go. So a lot of it is about knowledge, right? Ensuring that we're in our community board meetings and in our town halls and things of that nature, we're passing out this information. There's a lot of New York City has a lot of services, tons of services. So first is knowledge. The second part is, once they enter into shelter, we have to understand that this person is a person. And if we stop treating them like a placement number, right, then we would be able to advocate for them and give them comprehensive services. So understanding that homelessness is a response to trauma already experienced. So I have to address all of the trauma, right? So if you came in here for an eviction, I can't just put you in another house. I got to teach you financial literacy first,
Right.
right? Because all you're going to do is count bad the next time, right? Or if you can't sustain a job, I got to get you some job readiness training and financial literacy, right? Because then you'll just go to work and quit, right? And so all of those type of barriers as a provider, we provide to make sure that you're overcoming it so that when we put you in the housing, please do not come back.
Right.
Into shelter. That's the goal.
Right. Did you want one and done?
One and done, hopefully.
Hopefully.
But again, the system, unfortunately, sometimes is geared to keep you handicapped or crutched to it. And so again, at Housing Solutions, we try to make sure that, listen, don't look at this as a handicap. Don't let this become part of like your DNA. Understand that this is a temporary thing, right?
Right.
The city is offering temporary solutions, temporary financial assistance, anything like that to get you out, right? And then once you're out, we want to ensure that you have all of the things to be an independent person, to not have to rely on the system, and to be able to sustain yourself.
Are you seeing an increase in numbers given the fact of after COVID? Because we know that COVID, a lot of the moratorium was there. The moratorium is now lifted. What are you seeing?
So ironically, I'm seeing from an administrative perspective, a lot of people are not in the workforce. And then it makes you then wonder, if you're not in the workforce, then how are you paying bills, and then how are you sustaining, right? So the workforce is a very tricky place right now. I think everybody wants to be a YouTuber, right? But they can't be, right? Some of us have to go to work. So I think one of it has to do with career succession planning, as well as workforce development. And then the second part of it is housing stability. But also at the end of the day, we're not affordable. When we increased the voucher, the city recently increased the voucher, it's over $3,000. Now rent is $4,000. And so you're kind of like always in a catch-22. It's amazing how rent is $4,000. I look at my little cousins and I'm like, well, by the time you go into housing, rent might be $10,000.
Right.
$10,000. Right. But the cost of living in this city is not affordable. And then when you look at safety concerns, nobody wants to leave a shelter and then end up, in a place that has high crime and they can't walk their kid down the street. A mother or a father will always choose their child, and therefore you'll just stay in shelter. And so we got to find ways to advocate for more affordable housing, supportive housing, and a housing that's in safe communities, or make the communities more safe.
And you talk about advocating, as your voice is being out there and the voice is being heard and people are advocating. What are you hearing from community with regards to this? Because they're the ones who are really highly impacted by this and saying, listen, I can't afford this.
That's what everybody's saying, even the people who aren't in shelter, right? We all can't afford it. But what I do say to them is go to your community board. Community boards, believe it or not, a lot of us are focused on the President of the United States, which we should be. However, these local elected officials are the ones that we should really hone in on. Go to your community board. Talk about, the safety concerns in your area. Talk about the concerns. You can actually go to the providers. So if you have a provider in your area that you feel like the shelter is too much loitering or anything along those lines, outside of your community board, you can voice your concern to the provider, right? Again, like I've said, Housing Solutions, I'm very intentional about the fact that I do not want to ever have one of my sites be a nuance to the neighborhood, right? I need you to just be a building like everybody else. I need you to go inside like everybody else. I don't need you standing outside. So I want to make sure that we're not causing any more issues, right? Because there is a stereotype around homelessness.
Exactly.
Right? People don't want you in the neighborhood, right? All of the people who own houses, you don't want that. It's bringing the value down. That's how you look at it. So that's why, as a provider, I want to be intentional about, listen, we understand that you're in a bind. The community already has an opinion. Let's not add to it. And it's very important to do so. It's also very taxing, right, to try to think of it. But it's also what they need. Because when I put them back in permanent housing, you cannot be outside of the apartment building loitering. So it's the same concept. So we try to teach those life skills as they keep going through shelter.
So now, who's available for services, obviously, under your umbrella?
A couple people. So I do have a lot of asylees that are currently in some of my shelters. I have shelters in all 5 boroughs. I do have asylees in some of them. I do have native New Yorkers, of course. I also have some of my sites are for persons living with HIV and AIDS, giving direct services to that population. I also have some youth service programs, and I also have food and nutrition. I also have a care coordination program. So as you can see, I'm trying to touch every piece
Right.
of a person before they go back into the community. But everybody can access services. But like everything else, there is an intake center in this city, right? You can't come directly to Housing Solutions, but you can reach out to us if needed. We can redirect you in that regard to who you can go for the intake center and try to get services.
A lot of people talk about the red tape and really try to get through the red tape just to be able to get through the door. How do you view that process? And does it need some more streamlining?
All of our processes need more
Right.
They all need more streamlining, because a lot of our systems make it tougher for people to get through them. And while I'm on both sides, right, I understand why some of these processes require that, but then I also understand being a human being. And if I needed to bring my child or my, my niece or whatever through this system, I would not do it. I would try to find an alternative.
Right.
And so it's a lot to go through. But at the end of the day, it's how you work it, like every other system we have in this city, right? How do you work it? How do you want to get through it? And how do you want to get on the other side? But there are services to get you there. And you want to make sure that you pick the right services to get to the bottom line.
Yeah. How do the holidays flow for you guys?
Holidays are good. Halloween is the biggest holiday in family with children shelters.
Is that right?
Absolutely. Like it's decorated and you do this whole thing and then you get, all the kids get to dress up. It's very exciting. It's most money we spend all year. Halloween is a big holiday. Thanksgiving is also a big holiday, and then Christmas. We try to reach out if there's any local providers that are looking, or churches or anything like that want to donate. A lot of providers are interested in that to try to offset that. But the kicker of it is it's also a very sad time, right?
Right.
Because nobody wants to be in shelter for Thanksgiving. Nobody wants to be in shelter for Christmas. And so, we try to ensure that you have as close to normal as possible, right? Particularly, like, for example, for Thanksgiving, we have extended passes for you to return back to your family, right? So that you can, in fact, have a Thanksgiving meal. But if you don't have family, we also host Thanksgiving in the shelter so that you at least have a meal. And I don't mean the day-to-day food catering that we give. Like, we actually host Thanksgiving, right? We go get special meals because it's Thanksgiving. You can't have the same food that you've always been having. Christmas, same thing. Every kid gets a toy. Everybody's going to experience. Every building has a Christmas tree so that everybody all the children can feel as normal as possible. But we also ensure that we increase mental health services, right? Because it's sad, right? You're in a room, probably in a bunk bed with your kids. It's stressful. So we try to make sure that we offset that with ensuring that both the youth and the adults have some type of mental health services to ensure that they can survive the holiday season.
And before we go, I want to talk about the last word that you talked about, youth and children.
Yeah.
Right. And that population just continues to grow when you see that homeless population.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it goes back to the cost of living, right? The cost of living in this city is just really too high. And I don't know who I'm talking to. If you hear me, we got to figure out a way to offset that a little bit, right? NYCHA has, their concerns, and NYCHA is a good option for people. But then it's just, let's build housing. And it can't all be in the Bronx. The Bronx is doing our part. You'll see them. I'm pretty sure people are driving past. You're seeing a bunch of buildings being developed, and you're like, ooh, who about to live there, right? And then you try to find the lottery. So the Bronx is definitely doing their part. Other boroughs have to do the same thing. And affordable is not a $100,000 salary. Right? That is not the average salary for the New Yorker. And so we want to try to give more affordability. But particularly for youth and children in shelter, we need support of community organizations that can help us, right? Even though we have recreation in the shelter or in the shelter, we also can benefit from churches opening their doors too. We also can benefit from other youth providers allowing us to give space for youth because it's tight, right? You can't run up and down the hallways in a shelter. You're just in the room with your mother. Who wants to do that, right? So it's like, if we can have the community support as well, that would be great, because there is a direct impact of a youth living in shelter that can potentially contribute to generational homelessness, but it also can contribute to them ending up homeless later down the line. And so in order to combat that, we want to try to offset it with community resources. We do have, at Housing Solutions, we have a Connections to Cares Building Resilience in Youth program, where we're being very intentional with our youth about mental health stability and community engagement, because we don't want you to be the adult in shelter, right? So we want to try to help you navigate that. But there's a lot of services there too, but just making sure we hone in on them directly.
Dr. Xellex Rivera, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Nice being here.
Yes, she is the Chief Program Officer of Housing Solutions of New York. Now, if you want more information, go ahead and visit the website or the social media that you saw on the lower third. We are taking a quick break, but guess what? We'll have more right after this.